Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game.
You're listening to PTCG Radio.
Now, the last couple of weeks there haven't been any hugely exciting new developments, but luckily this week there has been. We had regionals in the USA this past weekend. There were 4 regionals that happened, and the results are in. But before we get into all of that, there are a couple of little news things I think I need to tell you about. Firstly, the 3 UK regionals have been announced. Now, obviously, this isn't that relevant to the people in the US, so I'll keep this moderately brief. In the UK, we don't have the strict regional timings that they have over in the US. Ours tend to be scattered throughout the year. Now, it used to be, 2 seasons ago, that these would all happen in March. Nowadays, last season and this season, we're given a fairly generous window running from November through to, I believe, March, in which these tournaments can actually be run. I believe we're having 6 of them, and last season there was 1 in Nottingham nice and early in November. This season, however, there are 3 regionals happening, all very, very early. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there is 1 in Aldershot on the 11th of November. That is a wonderful place I told you to go to the Battle Road to. That, however, although it is after the new set Boundaries Crossed is released, it's only 4 days after, and I have spoken to the head of Pokemon in the UK and received confirmation that if this does go ahead as it's planned, there will be no Boundaries Crossed legal for this. So the format you're playing in at the moment will be the format for this regionals. That will be followed up by a regionals in Nottingham on the 17th, carrying on its plan from last year to have these regionals early. And if you're not bored of regionals by that point, there is one happening in Exeter on the 25th of November. Now, those latter 2, Nottingham and Exeter, will both have Boundaries Crossed tournament legal, so you can bring out your new decks and have a play. It does, however, mean that those of you in the UK are going to need to get used to that new set pretty gosh darn quickly. We often see that after a new set or after a rotation, the first tournament or 2, you can have a bit of a leg up, a bit of an advantage if you can build a new deck or get together with new cards before other people. If you can do that in the UK this year, you could potentially have 2 high finishes in regionals, because they are happening 10 days and 18 days after the new set is released. Now, there will be another 3. I believe they're going to happen somewhere in London, in Cumbernauld, and in Manchester, although I do not have official confirmation of them, nor do I have confirmation of exactly when they will take place. Needless to say, when I do find out, I'll let you know. And speaking of UK tournaments, don't forget it is that wonderful Aldershot Battle Road this weekend. This Sunday, get yourself down to Aldershot. Just Google Aldershot Pokemon, you'll find it nice and easily. Go on down, it's going to be a good one. The other little piece of news we found is that the pre-release promo for the new set has been revealed as the Flygon. And this carries on Pokemon's recent plan to give us fairly good cards. We had the Altaria for the last set, we've now got Flygon for this one. Now, the attack on the Flygon isn't brilliant, but it does have that pretty funky body that puts 10 damage on your opponent's Pokemon between turns, so potentially could be used on some kind of duck and cover Pokemon, for instance, or to get that extra 10 damage when you can't get an attack off, or something like that. It is, as usual, got alternate art as they do nowadays, and it is stamped with the set logo as you would expect. And the last little piece of news is that Dragon Vault, the EXP share from Dragon Vault, has received an errata. And I was not actually aware of this, but it turns out that the EXP share that was printed in Dragon Vault was reprinted as a holo, but it didn't actually have the little box on it saying trainer item tool. So it didn't say it's a tool. However, it has been confirmed there has been an errata. An errata, for those of you that don't know, is an official adding or changing of the text of a card after it's been printed. So although it doesn't actually say it on the card, the judges at tournaments will know what the card actually is. So although that EXP share doesn't say that it's a tool, I can assure you it is a tool, and you can play it in a tournament as a tool as you would before. So that brings us to regionals. There were 4 regionals that happened in the US this past weekend, and here were the results. There was one in California that was won by Kian Amini, playing Rayquaza Electric. Second was Martin Moreno, playing Terrakion Mewtwo Roserade. More on that in a minute. Third was Murat Gursov, again my apologies for the pronunciations here, with Darkrai Terrakion. And fourth was Jason Chin with Mewtwo Electric. Over in Indiana, Ross Cawthorn, he who came second at Worlds last year, triumphed with Rayquaza Electric. Henry Pryor was defeated in the final, but he still got second with Darkrai, Terrakion, Stunfisk, Mewtwo, Ho-Oh. James Stumbo came third with Darkrai, Terrakion, Hammers, and Tyler Keller came fourth with Darkrai, Hydreigon. Moving into Pennsylvania, Ryan Sablehouse won with Darkrai, Sableye, Hammers. Gino Lombardi came second with Terrakion, Stunfisk, Mewtwo, Roserade. Jimmy Pendarvis came third with Darkrai, Terrakion, Hammers. And Alex Frezza rounded out the top four with Darkrai, Terrakion, Stunfisk, Roserade. And finally in Texas, Ty Smith triumphed with Rayquaza Electric. Mike Canaves came second with Darkrai, Sableye, Hammers. Chris Bianchi came third with Darkrai, Hydreigon, and Andy Meyer came fourth with Darkrai, Mewtwo. So what this really shows is, well, one thing, the notable players are still doing well. Texas won by Ty Smith, who was at Worlds this past year. Ryan Sablehouse and Gino Lombardi, for those of you that follow the game closely, they'll be names you're familiar with, and they were the top two finishers in Pennsylvania. Alex Frezza as well, fairly well-known player. And Henry Pryor's quite well known, the man who came second in Indiana, and most people will be aware of Ross Cawthorn. Unfortunately, when I started this podcast, people found a Pokemon podcast by a man called Ross, and instantly assumed that it was him doing the podcast. And sorry to let you down, but I'm afraid it's not him, it is unfortunately me. So I didn't get second at Worlds. He, however, did in 2011 and one other year, which I don't have on me at the moment. Never actually won Worlds, but let's face it, he's got to the final twice, so he's a pretty gosh darn good player. Now, in terms of the decks being played, I told you last week that I couldn't see anything other than Darkrai Hydreigon or Rayquaza Eels winning regionals. And that was almost held to be true. California, Indiana and Texas were all taken down with Rayquaza Electric. That deck won 3 of the 4 regionals. And I think it has now cemented its place as the best deck in the format. Now, don't get me wrong, you know, there is Boundaries Cross coming out in a couple of weeks. That's going to change everything up a little bit. It might not be the best deck till then. But certainly, looking at the results, it is fairly empirical that the best deck was Rayquaza Electric. Now, the one that wasn't won by Rayquaza Electric wasn't actually won by Darkrai Hydreigon either. It was won by Darkrai Hammers. That was Ryan Sablehouse winning in Pennsylvania. Now, this was a deck which I've talked about recently, and I said it was better than people were giving it credit for. It had the potential to be better and to give people better results than they were currently achieving with it. Now, that doesn't mean it's an amazing deck. I still don't think it's got a particularly good matchup against Darkrai Hydreigon, especially if they play Sigilyph. But it is a very, very strong deck, and it's a very, very good deck, and you know, he came away with a win. The thing to note here as well, though, is that Ryan Sablehouse is an exceptional player. He's the kind of person you'd expect to be seeing winning something like regionals, or at least placing very highly, regardless of what he plays. Now, there are some unusual decks and techs we saw. Well, in terms of decks, wasn't really anything that unusual. There were Terrakion-based decks, Darkrai Terrakion, Darkrai Mewtwo, and other Darkrai decks, Hammers, Hydreigon, etc. Some of the usual Terrakion and Darkrai decks, and the usual Rayquaza Eels decks. Although, as far as I am aware, there was a Mewtwo Electric that came first and third in Ontario, a regional that happened in Canada at the same time. But I do not believe there were any... Oh, no, there was. Jason Chin, in California. He got 4th with Mewtwo Electric. There were no Zekrom Electric in any of the top 4s, and just that one Mewtwo Electric played by Jason Chin in California. So in terms of decks, there wasn't anything that unusual. But techs really seemed to make a difference. There were several of the top 4 decks. Alex Frezza's Darkrai Terrakion Stunfisk in Pennsylvania, and Martin Moreno's Terrakion Mewtwo in California that played Roserade. Now, Roserade, for those of you that don't know, it's the Stage 1 Pokemon. You evolve it, it's got a ability, and when you evolve into Roserade, you get to search your deck for any card you like. That could be a catcher, another Pokemon, an energy, something like a double colourless energy, which cannot be searched out with any other card, can be searched out with this. You can search for a supporter, so that you've got that guaranteed draw that turn, and it's a supporter you want. It is a fantastic card, and it was one with which I was experimenting in an Empoleon build right at the beginning of Battle Roads. Now, how exactly it worked in something like Terrakion, Stunfisk, Mewtwo, I'm not exactly sure. You would have to put in, presumably, a bit more Pokemon search to try and get them out. You're also running low HP basics and easy prizes, which slightly goes against the point of these big decks. However, if it gives you that edge of finding the cards you need when you need them, it's clearly good. Another interesting tech we saw was that Henry Pryor, who came second in Indiana, did so with Darkrai, Terrakion, Stunfisk, Mewtwo, Ho-Oh. And he has posted his list on the website heytrainer.org. If you do go there, I would give you a quick warning. The language on that forum is somewhat colourful. I'm not saying don't go there, it's a fantastic site, there's some really good stuff on it. But do be careful if you go to Hey Trainer, there is some bad language. If you're of the younger persuasion or you're slightly more easily offended than most, I wouldn't go along there. But Henry Pryor has posted his list up on Hey Trainer for you to go and have a look at. And he didn't play a huge range of energy. It was Darkrai Terrakion with Stunfisk and Mewtwo, he played Basic Dark, and he played Basic Fighting. And that was it. Ho-Oh wasn't used in the same way it's used in a traditional Ho-Oh deck, where you've got all the different types of energy and you get Ho-Oh going with free energy and switch it round to a multitude of attackers, or even just start hammering away with Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh was used just as energy acceleration, a way to get extra fighting or dark energy onto the field. Now obviously you've got Dark Patch in that, but theoretically you could get a Terrakion land crushing in one turn by attaching, getting a Ho-Oh and energy switching, and then Dark Patch and energy switching, or just energy switching a second one from that Ho-Oh. It's a way to get that deck working much more quickly. And with both Dark Patch and Ho-Oh, theoretically, you can get a Mewtwo rolling much more easily than you would otherwise. So a very, very interesting tech, and a way that most people aren't playing Ho-Oh. And you tend to find these things in regionals. People, they don't always win with new decks, but these techs that people aren't using in Battle Roads, they do bring out of regionals. The theory being that people don't want to shoot their load too early. People don't want to turn around and show all of their best tricks right before regionals. And that's fair enough, to be honest. They save their good techs for regionals, and that's why we didn't see things like Roserade and Ho-Oh being used like this at Battle Roads, because the people that had come up with these brilliant ideas were saving them. However, the best tech I haven't mentioned yet. Far and away the best and most inventive tech that came around at regionals was Victini, and it was being played in Rayquaza Electric. Now, giving them credit, I believe Ty Smith played this down in Texas, but it's gained notoriety from Ross Cawthorn playing it in Indiana. The reason for that is the website thetopcut.net, which I've mentioned before. They streamed at Indiana Regionals, and they've put a bunch of videos from Indiana Regionals up on their website. So please do go and have a look at them if you wish. And the way Victini, there are several Victinis, it was the Fliptini. The one that's got the garbage attack, but it's got an ability whereby if you have to flip a coin for an attack, it's called Victory Star, and if you don't like the result of that coin flip, you can flip again. So what you would do is you would use a Thunder Wave Dynamo. For 1 electric energy, does 10 damage, which is not really the point, but on a coin flip with a heads, it paralyses your opponent, and that gives you a 50% chance of paralysis. And that is an attack which has been used for as long as electric's been around, or at least as long as that Dynamo's been around. However, with Victini, that 50% chance of paralysis raises to a 75% chance of paralysis. Now, paralysis isn't that big a deal. We've got Super Scoop Up, we've got Switch, etc. But the interesting thing is that at the moment, Darkrai decks have been taking over the format. And Darkrai's ability gives any Pokemon that's got Dark Energy attached free retreat. For this reason, and this is something I mentioned on the podcast last week or the week before, a lot of Darkrai decks aren't playing Switch, and that is a mistake. Now, when I talked about it, I talked about Stunfisk being able to KO a Darkrai and the opponent having to sit there and let it get killed. But what Ross Cawthorn and Ty Smith, and potentially others, although I'm not aware of them right now, what they were doing was starting the game with a Thunder Wave Dynamo and just paralysing. And they could sit there setting up their electrics while their opponent was paralysed. And then putting energy onto their Rayquaza. And then they could set up a couple of Rayquazas with fire and a couple of lightning, etc., while the opponent was just sitting there being paralysed turn after turn. And what that did was it meant that by the time the opponent actually got to attack, you were streaming Rayquazas, and the match was significantly easier. It's an absolutely genius play. It's a wonderful move. Now, Ty Smith and Ross Cawthorne are both high-level players. They're both moderately well-known players. It could be that they thought of this idea and, shared it between themselves and talked about it. It could be that they got it completely independently. I don't know at this particular stage. What I do know is it was a fantastic idea, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the two of them came up with that wonderful idea and then ended up taking the tournament home. Now, the other thing to mention is attendances. I did say I'd have a look for attendances, and I have found them. And the attendances, as I suggested they might be, were pretty gosh darn high. Now, I'm only going to look at the Masters attendances for now, because I don't want to be going on too long. In each of them, it was about 70% Masters. In fact, it was pretty much 70% Masters in all four of them. In Texas, we saw 261 Masters. In Indiana, we saw 329 Masters. In Pennsylvania, we saw 306 Masters. And in California, we saw 252 Masters. So the smallest one, California, with 253. And the largest one was in Indiana, which saw 329. For those of you that are fast at maths, that gives an average of 287 players per regionals. Now, this time last year, there were 6 regionals going on, and the average attendance at last year's regionals was 194. Now, admittedly, there are less regionals now, but there is a slight increase in numbers. But also, what we saw here was a huge jump in average attendance. Almost 100 extra people per regional. So whereas last time you'd be seeing 194, this year you're seeing 287. Now, there's 2 more rounds of regionals to come in the US, and I think that you can safely assume that there are going to be attendances of around about that number at the other regionals that are coming around. These are very big tournaments, and as I've said before, this is why people save these good cars, these good techs. Another reason why these attendances are going up is partly the lack of regionals. There's only 4, so the average attendance will climb. But also, what you've got to consider is that the championship point structure this year is more forgiving. A win at regionals gives 120 points. That's almost a third of the way to an invite. It's certainly a huge leg up. All you need to do is win a regionals, cut a few cities and a few battle roads, and you can pretty much be at your invite anyway. And what this has done is it's made people think that these invites are easier to get. Now, I'm not entirely convinced they are easier to get, but they certainly look like they are more achievable. And for that reason, people are going around to try and get these points. People have complained about the format all year, and people have complained about prizes being lowered, etc, etc. But the reality of it is, we've got more people going to these tournaments than ever before. Now, maybe they are just going there to try and hoover up all the points they can, but it could just be a sign that actually the game is pretty gosh darn healthy and pretty gosh darn good. Now, I could repeat my point that I went on about last week about finances in Pokemon, etc, and running these free tournaments and the attendance being higher than they expected, etc. It's not a point I wish to repeat this week, but it is something that you may wish to consider. Now, this past weekend, I wasn't in America. I was in England, but there were some battle roads. And I went along to them, so I'm going to, before we have a nice little discussion about slow playing, I'm going to share with you my experiences at these battle roads from last weekend. On the Saturday, I made my way down to St Austell in Cornwall, which is right in the bottom left-hand corner of the United Kingdom as you look at it on a map. Now, I did tweet that I had driven 400 miles to go to a battle road. It was a little bit of a lie, to be honest. That was how far I drove, and I did go to a battle road, but I'm actually from Cornwall. My friends and family are down there, so I went down for the weekend to do a number of things, and while I was there, I dropped in on the tournament in St Austell. Now, I'd been there a couple of times before for little, just weekly tournaments, not proper Premier events, and I'd been very disappointed. The people hadn't been friendly, the organisation had been poor, the tournaments had been run badly, the judging had been of a poor standard, and I hadn't had a lot of fun at all. So it was with more than a little apprehension that I set out. When I got there, not only did I find out that instead of the usual 4 or 5 masters, there were about 20, I also found out that people were playing proper decks. I saw people with Electric and Darkrai Hydreigon and Ho-Oh, and I thought it would be a more enjoyable tournament game-wise. And then I started talking to some of the people there, and as it turned out, it was almost unrecognisable from the place I'd played before. It was a wonderful place, it was good atmosphere, friendly people, I got chatting to a load of new people, and I had a really good day overall. My one concern was that the lone judge was married to one of the competitors, but that never actually turned out to be a problem, although that had the potential to be somewhat of a sticky situation. So, I took down my Mewtwo Terrakion deck, the same one that I had piloted to a third place finish in Nottingham. I still had faith for the deck, and I thought against the Electric and Darkrai decks I was seeing, I thought it would do pretty well. So I started off playing a guy called Aaron, playing Garchomp Altaria. Now this is not the kind of deck I want to see. Generally these decks lose early and languish near the bottom tables, because they're not good against the majority of decks. However, against decks like Mewtwo Terrakion that can only attach once per turn, they can get attacking turn 2 or 3 and actually give you a little bit of trouble, because they can be 2-hitting you and you can be 2-hitting them, but they're taking 2 prizes. Now, when I Identity 2 in this matchup, I catch and kill the Altarias, and while they're doing that, they're 2-hitting my Mewtwo or my Terrakion. And that doesn't really bother me at all, because they'll hit me for, say, 100, because I don't have any Altarias out. I'll then heal or stick an Eviolite on, so they can't kill me the following turn. So they're actually 3-hitting me at best, while I'm taking a prize each turn, and then 2-hitting them. And the math works out quite nicely. Unfortunately, I had a very bad start to this game. I went second. I mulliganed twice. And on about a second or third turn, with no energy, and obviously behind one energy attachment because I'd gone second, I had to Juniper to try and get attacking. And in doing so, I got rid of all 3 of my potions, my max potion, and I'd used my Eviolites, but I'd used them too early on Pokemon which I wouldn't really want to put them on. So this meant that I couldn't really heal very much, which threw my primary game plan out the window, because now he would just be 2-hitting me with a Garchomp while I was taking out his Swablues and Altarias, and then I would be stuck trying to 2-hit KO the Garchomp while he was 2-hit KOing me. So I had to try and take out the Garchomps, and it was difficult. There was a fairly pivotal moment early on. I had maybe 30 or 40 cards left in deck, and he had an active Emolga with an energy. I had a Mewtwo with a double colourless, he had a Swablu on the bench. So what this meant was, if I could draw one of my 4 catchers, I could take out the Swablu, or if I could draw one of my 4 plus powers, I could take out the Emolga. Now, I Junipered, I drew 7 cards, there are 8 cards I want in my deck, which means if there are 56 cards left in my deck, it is statistically likely I'll draw one that I want. There were no more certainly than 40 cards in my deck, so statistically I should have got one. Needless to say I don't, and I'm stuck hitting the Emolga for 60 damage. The game goes on, it's incredibly close because my options are severely limited by what's happened early on in the game, and eventually it comes down to me not having enough energy. So I stick a Mewtwo up, let him hit the Mewtwo for 100. I then energy switch that energy onto a second Mewtwo, switch that second Mewtwo active, attach an Eviolite, and then I'm able to hit his Garchomp for 80, knowing that the following turn I'll hit it, go down to 1 prize, and he won't be able to respond with anything, and I'll win the game fairly easily. And if he doesn't have a catcher, I win. Needless to say, in his deck of about 20 cards with 1 catcher left, he top decks that catcher for the win. It was a very disappointing game. Had I not gone second, I would have pulled out the win. Had I not whiffed the catcher and plus power on the Emolga, I probably would have got the win. But these things happen. It's a deck I'm not used to losing to with this particular deck, and it's a game that certainly I would have expected to win, but these things happen. It is a game with a large amount of luck in, and there's nothing I could do about it. I knew that still winning the next 3 and going 3-1 would probably give me points. So the next game I'm drawn against a lovely Pokedad who's playing Sigilyph, Mewtwo, Raikou, and I think he's got some Eels in there as well. It unfortunately was a very short and uneventful game. He went first, I mulliganed 3 times. He hit my Mewtwo with his for 80. I dropped a Terrakion on the bench so I didn't get benched, dropped a DCE plus power and knocked out his Mewtwo. On my second turn I captured another Mewtwo he'd put down, hit it for 80, and attached to the Terrakion. On my third turn I knocked out that Mewtwo for prizes 3 and 4. He then knocked out my Mewtwo, and on my 4th turn I captured and killed a Raikou with Terrakion to take my 5th and 6th prizes. Very short, uneventful game, but it was fun and we had a chat, and a good time was had by all. In round 3, I was drawn against a Ho-Oh deck. Now, this was a man who hadn't been playing too long, and it was a fairly standard game against Ho-Oh. I lost the flip again, but I only mulliganed once, which is, much better than my other games. And it went fairly as standard. I was 2-hitting him, he was 2-hitting me, but he had a bit of a supporter drought mid-game. Goes back to what I was saying last week about running 14 or 15 supporters as a minimum. He missed a couple of energy drops, and I had my healing, so whereas I was 2-hitting him, he was often left trying to 3-hit me, and that meant that the mass worked out in my favour. It was quite a long game, it was fun, we had a good chance to play and try and outthink each other, but at the end of the day, the healing and the fact that my deck worked a bit more consistently meant that I was always going to have the win in that game. And then in round 4, after not facing any Darkrai or Electric, I finally got my reward and played against a Darkrai Hydreigon deck. And unfortunately this went exactly as it should. Now needless to say I went second, and needless to say I mulliganed twice, giving me a total of, out of 4 games, 0 times going first, and 9 mulligans. Now I was playing 8 basics, so statistically, I've got a 58 in 60 chance of hitting a basic from my opening hand of 7. So I'm not statistically likely to hit one, or statistically certain, but I should hit one the vast majority of games. I certainly shouldn't be mulliganing 9 times out of 13. But I did. So we start off, and I attach to a Terrakion EX, and then turn 2 I take out a Dino, and then turn 3 I take out a Dino, and turn 4 I take out a Dino. He pops up a Sigilyph, which I'm able to kill with a regular Terrakion, and then shortly afterwards I capture and kill his Darkrai. It wasn't a particularly eventful game, but to be honest, I'd built that deck specifically to try and beat Darkrai Hydreigon, so the game went as it should have done, really. So I finished the day at 3-1, I got 4th place. I was a little disappointed because the top 2 decks, and I'm very sorry I forgot the names of the people who came first and second, they were both playing Darkrai Hydreigon, clearly decent players, clearly people who had decent lists, but I would like to have been able to test myself against them to see if I could have beaten their Darkrai Hydreigon. Similarly, the gentleman who came third, lovely chat, we had a good chat at the end of it. Hello to him if he is listening to this, as he told me he would. And also hello to the winner of the tournament, who also told me he'd be listening to this. And again, he was playing Zekrom Electric, so it's a matchup where I would have favoured my deck. But I didn't get to play any of the top 3, so it's a bit of a moot point. But I continued my day in Cornwall and had a very nice time. The following day, I took a fairly lengthy drive over to Horsham in West Sussex, and I played another Battle Road. This one, all the way up in the car, I was thinking I wanted to bring out Empoleon. I'd top cut 3 out of 4 Battle Roads, I was sitting on 30 points, and that was my aim for this round of Battle Roads. I can pick up the other 30 in spring. So I was thinking that I wanted to play Empoleon, give him one more run out, and quite frankly, I bottled it. I wanted to play Empoleon, I told myself I'd play Empoleon, got to the tournament, bottled it, and just played Mewtwo Terrakion. I did mean to put a Stunfisk in, but I forgot to actually do so, and I realised I think 2 turned into the first game. What can you do? So round 1 I'm playing against a gentleman called Simon, lovely chap, and he was playing Garchomp Altaria. But unlike yesterday, or the day before I should say, it went exactly as it should. I had my healing cards, I forced him into 3 hit KOs at best, and I took out all his Altarias, and the game went very swimmingly. It was a best of 3, but both games went as they should. So I'm playing Mewtwo Terrakion. I've got 1 energy attachment per turn. Round 2, I'm drawn against Ben Stewart Armstead. Not only is he a very good Worlds quality player, but he always beats me. We've played twice, he won them both. And he's playing Darkrai Terrakion Hammers. It's an almost unwinnable game if it goes well. So game 1 we get going, and again he stops me in the early game, he gets set up. Eventually I'm able to, he's using a Sableye to Junk Hunt, so eventually I'm able to drop a DCE plus power in 1 turn to take out the Sableye, and with the Sableye down it forces him into actually using his Darkrai. That gives him less hammers, and it means I'm able to start making an attempt to win this game. But I was just too far behind from the beginning, and it was never going to happen. Late game, I managed to play around with my energy and actually get enough energy on him to do 140 to a Darkrai with my Mewtwo. I had 2 plus powers in hand, I could have done 160, but there was no way of closing out the game. He'd taken too much energy off me in the early game. So game 2, I get to go first. Now I forgot to mention I actually went second in the 2 games I played so far, so that meant 6 going second in a row in these past 2 tournaments. But I get to go first because I lost the first game, and it was the least eventful game you've ever seen. What would happen was, I started Mewtwo DCE, and I hit his Darkrai for 20. Every turn he drew, looked a little bit sad and passed. I attached an energy, did a bit more damage. I knocked out all 3 of his Darkrai's fairly quickly. He did finally get to play an end, but he unfortunately ended me into a DCE and a Juniper, which was the best hand he possibly could have ended me into. And round Game 3 went exactly like Game 1 did. He got the energy taken off me early, and although I mounted a fairly nice comeback, it was just never going to happen. So I'm sitting at 1-1, knowing that 2 more wins will bring me through. And there's a few Darkrai decks, there's Darkrai Hydreigon, there's some Eels, there's a Terrakion Groudon deck which I can run through with my high Mewtwo count. So I'm thinking there's a lot of decks that I don't want to play. And then I'm drawn against Samuel McClúey. And I know what Sam's playing because we were sitting almost opposite each other in the first game. He's playing Quad Sigilyph. I think he's got a Mewtwo in there as well, but he's basically just playing Quad Sigilyph. Now I had cut a Terrakion EX for a regular Terrakion, which meant that I had 2 Bouffalon and a Terrakion to attack him with. Not only was he playing Quad Sigilyph, taking out most of my attackers, he was playing it with 4 Crushing Hammer and at least 2 Enhanced Hammer. So I knew this was going to be an almost unwinnable game. Game 1, it goes exactly as it should. I started Bouffalon, I started chipping away, but I've got limited attackers, he's got hammers, and because he's able to chip away my energy whilst taking down the HP of my Pokemon, it's just never going to work. Game 2, however, he was forced to Juniper 2 double colourless energies early on. Now this is significant because it means that if I can start taking out his Sigilyph, instead of 2 energy attachments to power up a Sigilyph, DC and a Psychic, he's then doing 3 energy attachments to power up a Sigilyph. So if I can start knocking his Sigilifs out fast enough, he's not going to get the energy on, and even if he starts hitting Crushing Hammers, I'm going to win this game. Now I make a huge mistake early on. I start Bouffalon and I bench Terrakion, which is stupid. What I need to do is wait until I can get 2 or 3 energy on a Terrakion in one turn, and then pop the Terrakion down, but I don't do that, and he takes out my Terrakion far too early. I eventually get down to a situation where if he doesn't hit a Crushing Hammer, and if I can draw a potion, I can win the game. Needless to say, I don't. He does hit the Crushing Hammer, I don't draw a potion. In that game, I used a potion early on, and then I didn't see another potion, even though I got down to 4 cards in my deck, and 2 prizes, I still didn't see any of my other 3 potions. But what can you do? These things happen. So I was sitting at 1-2, and I had about a 3-hour drive home, so for the first time ever, I actually dropped from a tournament. I felt a little bit sad, but unfortunately, I had a very long drive ahead of me. Now, in terms of that tournament, it was won by Nicholas Fotheringham with Darkrai Terrakion. Jack Stewart Armstead came second with Darkrai Hydreigon, and Samuel McClúey got 3rd place with his Quad Sigilyph deck. I forget who came fourth, my apologies for that, and my round 2 opponent, Ben Stewart Armstead with his Darkrai Terrakion Hammers, he went 3-1 and actually managed to miscut in 5th place. So the 2 people I lost to were playing pretty much auto losses to me and both finished 3-1, which made me feel a little bit better. But I did come out of this tournament thinking that this deck with a 1 energy attachment, it's a little bit slow, and I'm starting to lose faith for the deck just a little bit. Now, what I want to finish off talking about today is slow playing. There was a very interesting thread started on PokerGym about a man who had watched the Top Cuts coverage of Indiana Regionals, the one won by Ross Cawthorn, and had talked about how slow Ross was playing. Now, in theory, slow playing is quite bad. It means your opponent doesn't have enough time to run their moves, and if you slow play and deliberately stall, you can manipulate the clock so your opponent doesn't have enough time to pull off all the moves they want to and pull out a win, etc. Now, Ross Cawthorn is a well-known player, and he has somewhat of a reputation as being a very, very good player. But he also has a reputation of slow playing. So one question that was asked is, was he a very good player? Or does he just do well because he gets that extra time to think because he's a slow player? Now, I think that question is absolute rubbish. The man finished 2nd in Worlds twice. He's not gaining some kind of unfair advantage slow playing. He's just that gosh darn good. There's plenty of other slow players around who aren't as good as him, and he admits he plays slower than average. Now, I thought this raised an interesting question in terms of slow playing. I also, though, did think it was quite inappropriate to start a thread about a particular player slow playing. So what I do not want to do is turn this into a discussion of why this particular player plays slowly, etc. I thought it was an interesting debate to raise. I don't wish to imply anything about this particular player at all. Now, his opponent in the final, Henry Pryor, he posted and said he wasn't allowed to slow play, the judges were on it. Ross admitted that he was given 2 warnings throughout the tournament, and he didn't argue with either of them. It was also brought up that there are 2 different ways to slow play. One is slow playing deliberately to try and gain an advantage. Another is playing slowly because you play slowly. You're a thoughtful player. To be completely honest, I wish I'd played more slowly in most of my games because I tend to rush myself and make silly mistakes. Now, I had a bad experience at Worlds in my very first game. I was playing against an Exalgor deck, and that player played incredibly slowly, and that's absolutely fine. It's an Exalgor deck. I knew he'd play slowly. I didn't begrudge him that because I know it's a very complicated deck. But similarly, it's a complicated deck to play against. I had to work out the poison damage and the 50, etc, etc. I had to work out exactly what he was going to do. And my beef in this particular game wasn't his slow playing, because I expected that. It was that kind of deck. It was that he started rushing me. He would take very, very long turns and then start rushing me on my turns because he didn't want time to run out because he was playing a deck which struggled a bit with time. So I didn't like that because he was slow playing and then rushing me. Now, in terms of slow playing, it's up for debate, to be honest. Some people think it's bad, other people don't. There is a limit. What I would say is if you're in a tournament and somebody's slow playing, call a judge. That's what the judges are there for. I don't think we should be vilifying people on the internet for slow playing. Now, because I've mentioned that Ross was brought up as somebody who was slow playing, I think it's only fair to give you a little bit of a flavour of his response. He pointed out that he probably could have won Worlds 2011 if he'd played faster. Certainly he was playing a deck which won when it set up, and there was hardly any time at all for Game 3. Maybe if he'd played faster, he could have won Worlds. Similarly, the game people are talking about, his round 8 match, there were 2 people who were 7-0 and they were only determining seeding. He pointed out that his first turns are slow because on your first turn of the game you have to check prizes. You have to see what's prized, what's already in your deck. The first turns are always the slowest and the most complicated. He also pointed out, quite rightly, that after checking the timing of the other turns, it was only the first few turns he was a little bit slower on, and they are the turns when you should be playing a little bit more slowly. He said that he'd given 2 warnings and didn't argue. And I think the most important point here, there was a 75-minute top cut in this particular regionals, and he didn't win a single top cut game on time. So, I suppose to sum up my slow playing, it's something I wanted to raise, it's something people are talking about on the forums. I think it can be a problem, but all you need to do is ask your opponent to hurry up, and if they don't, call over a judge. I certainly don't think it's something we need to be picking out individuals for and vilifying them on the internet. I think that's just a little bit rude. Yes, he is a slow player and he has a reputation for being a slow player, but as he pointed out, should he not also have a reputation of someone who plays in a very considered, thoughtful manner, and that's taken him to 2 World Championship finals? And that is pretty much going to wrap it up for this week. If you are out and about, you will be able to find me at Sheffield Regionals on the Saturday, and if all goes well, that wonderful Aldershot Battle Roads, I should say, and that wonderful Aldershot Battle Roads on Sunday. Next Sunday, I may also be at Exeter Battle Roads, depending how awake I'm feeling after one of my favourite nights of the year, which is the Falmouth Beer Festival. If I'm awake and coherent enough, I'll be at Exeter Battle Roads. If you come along to any of them, please do make sure you come and say hello. Now, I always ask you to email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or find me on Twitter at TheWassy, or just leave a comment on Pokemon Dan's YouTube channel, where statistically a bunch of you will be listening to this. Please tell me about anything you want, give me some feedback, ask me some questions, tell me about your most memorable game. But what I really want to hear about is, were there any PTCG radio listeners competing in any of these 4 regionals this past weekend? If you're listening to this right now and you did compete at regionals last weekend, please get in touch with me via the YouTube comments or by email or by Twitter, and to let me know how you did at regionals. Send me an email or a tweet, say hello, tell me how you did. What did you play? What record did you get? Did you have any particularly memorable games, etc.? As always, thank you to Pokemon Dan and for Dot Deck and 6 Prizes for helping me to promote this. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.
Well, thank you for that, Ross. It was both informative and stimulating.